This is what the today's conversation will be all about. Not the climate change as an abstract challenge, but climate economic as a leadership capability. But according to IMF, climate inaction would shave up to 18% of global GDP by 2050. On the other hand, ILO estimates the green transition could generate 210 million new jobs globally by 2030. So the question is no longer should we act, it is how fast can we build the competence to act well. You might have noticed we live in this paradoxa era where before we uh, where never before we had so much of data available on the planet, and yet our collective decision often fail to match that knowledge. The climate change challenge is not about just technology or finance, it's about human cognition itself. We struggle to value the long term, to price the invisible, and to act before the crisis becomes visible. This, I believe, is defining the leadership challenge of our generation. How to move from knowing to understanding and from understanding to action. To explore this shift from cognitive to capability, we have three exceptional voices today. First of all, we have Navya Singh. She is founder of News with Navya and a co-founder of a company called Green Intent. Navya has spent her career amplifying the voices at the intersection of environment and enterprise. Through her reporting across India, from bamboo innovators in Assam to the circular fashion enterprise in Delhi, she has shown that climate action is not a theory, but everyday act of entrepreneurship and livelihood creation. Welcome, Navya. The next panelist we have is Mr. Sopan Joshi, a journalist, earther, and a public intellectual whose works like Jal Thal Mal and Magnifera Indica, the biography of mango, invites us to see ecology not as an issue but as an inheritance. Sopanji has written a decade on water, agriculture, and the tribal rights, and his critique to modern cognition in understanding the climate is both necessary and thought-provoking. Welcome, Sopanji. Our third panelist is Rahul Bagadia, Chairman and Managing Director of P-Manifold Business Solution. Rahul leads the strategy and system design projects in e-mobility, green hydrogen, clean tech, both at India and at global level. He represents the bridge between the engineering logic and the executive decision making, turning the decarbonization into actionable business strategy. A very warm welcome to all the distinguished panel of the experts. Now, I would like to start with you, Navya. From your experience that captures how the climate action is not confined to the boardroom, it's happening in bamboo cluster, it's happening in community engagement model, it's happening from waste to value startup. Could you please share some examples where climate action at grassroots not only have reduced emission but created real economic mobility? Also, in your course of action, what type of new roles have you seen emerging as an interaction between the tradition and the innovation? Over to you, Navya.
Right. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I think what you've asked is a very important question. Um, it's been 3 years that I've been reporting on climate action and sustainability. I've had my share on, when I used to report for politics, defense, and other sectors as well, left all of that to focus only on climate action. What I have observed is as someone who's attending events after events across India, I see the conversation that happens at these fancy events and boardrooms and hotels are very different and they're far from reality. And a lot of observations that I've had when I travel for stories are very different and grounded in reality, right? So recently I went to this place called Gunjung, which is on the Assam-Nagaland border. And the intention was very simple, to go and document their lifestyle, to go and document the way people live, and what kind of stories can we really get and how are they linked to urban India, right? We saw job opportunities that I don't think we could have thought of or imagined sitting in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, any of these places, right? These are communities that grow what they eat. They stitch their own clothes. They've created employment out of a very, widely available and very commonly available resource called bamboo. And they survive on that. They make money out of it. They grow their own rice, they grow everything that they consume, right? So a lot of these stories that we've been able to document tells us something really important, that they look after what they consume, they look after the forest, they look after the ecosystem that they're dependent on, and thereby create livelihoods out of it. This is something we've also observed when we travel to a place called Devariya in Uttar Pradesh, for example. We went with the idea of documenting something really amazing and unknown to us people living in big cities. However, we ended up doing stories around rice. So there's a particular rice that Devariya, that region has. It's called Kala Namak rice. And the reason we were obsessed with it for so long and we did so many stories around it is because it's low on glycemic index. And these are data and these are information that not a lot of people know about. These are only known to farmers who grow these crops and who live there and who are dependent on this land, right? So they were able to convince us and tell us that this particular rice variety has low glycemic index. It's great for people with diabetes, with high blood sugar, rich in iron, rich in zinc. And we could gather all of this information and then understand how they are creating employment out of it, how they are making money out of it, how it is an ODOP product, which is one district, one product, how they are making money out of it, and how we can take it to the mainstream. Now, this story came out a week after we did a story on how basmati rice is consuming so much groundwater in a state like Punjab, right? So we were able to bring this knowledge to a state like Punjab and tell them that, maybe you also have your own local varieties. If not rice, then something else. Why don't we grow that? Why are we growing basmati, which is neither good for health nor good for the environment or the soil? So a lot of these stories, you mentioned bamboo, for example, and as a news organization, we've been obsessed with bamboo because we run a show called Let's Talk Bamboo, which only talks about how this one particular grass, this one particular resource opens up opportunities for farmers, consumers, and people from different walks of life. And we represented India at the European Bamboo Expo, which happened in Germany. And we talked about how it's so common for people in the Northeast, in Assam, Nagaland, Manipur, so many other states, to use bamboo for everything that they want. When I was in Gunjung, I could literally see a man take a bamboo, piece of bamboo and then make a flute out of it in less than 5 minutes. He knew exactly where to make a cut and then the flute was ready, right? So every small thing, when they have containers in their kitchen or if they want to drink tea, they don't take glasses. The concept of plastic does not exist. They take a bamboo shoot and they put tea and they drink it like that, right? So these were the kind of opportunities that we wanted to spotlight. And after that, we realized that given how India is also pushing for clean energy, given how we're pushing for something like ethanol, there's a lot of scope when we really understand bamboo from that perspective and empower farmers, right? This is also true in the case of sugarcane. When we travel to Maharashtra to do stories around sugarcane, we realize there's a lot of opportunity when it comes to jobs in terms of awareness. And we wanted to bring all of that to the big cities, to all the conversations that we have there. So having said that, there are all the travel that involves covering these stories. I feel we've been able to document a lot to do with local wisdom, and that's primarily what News with Navya focuses on, a lot to do with local wisdom, traditional wisdom, and how that links to green jobs, how that links to green employment. A very interesting but so-called messy sector that we call is waste management, right? I've worked with so many waste management entrepreneurs in India, and one thing they tell me is that people feel, or they have this perception that it's a very filthy, it's a very messy industry, which is why a lot of entrepreneurs in the waste management sector are still struggling to find the right talent, right? Because we feel when it's waste management, the only job that is associated with it is that of a waste picker. But that's not true. There are companies making brilliant products out of recycled, repurposed waste. And they have brilliant teams. They've been able to not just create employment, but also give, a lot of respectful job opportunities to people who were earlier known as just garbage pickers or waste pickers. So now they're technicians. Now they know technically how to handle, segregate, deal with waste, and create products that we proudly display at homes, right? So we've also seen that change in narrative happen, and we're working very closely with all of these companies, right from EV and mobility to waste management to a lot of other sectors, clean energy, for example. And we can see how the definition is sort of changing and the kind of job roles that are emerging. And where we come in that, in that story is how we try to change the perception, We tell people that there are dignified jobs available if you want to work in the waste management sector. There are jobs in clean energy beyond just the pictures of a technician fitting a solar panels. There's more than that. There's more to agriculture, there's more to food. And everything, as I said, everything eventually will be linked to green skills and green jobs. It's all about that perception and that narrative that we want to shape here.
Thank you so much, Nadia. I find it very interesting that there is a gap between what we want to, what we are doing versus that consciousness and the purpose why we are doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the education and the capability building of how do we think needs to evolve. That also takes me to Sopanji. Sopanji, you have argued that the biggest limitation is not lack of data, but lack of imagination. We cannot process how the slow violence of climate change is happening. Why do you think, sir, that human cognition and traditional economics fall short in understanding the true nature of climate change?
Good afternoon. Let me give you an example. I'm sitting in Delhi right now. You can see that I'm sitting down. Everything is stable. This doesn't mean that I can sense that I'm moving at a speed of about 1470 kilometers per hour westwards, because that's how the earth is rotating. Right? I don't have a sense of my speed through space, which is more than 100,000 kilometers an hour. I'm doing about 23 kilometers per second, but I don't sense that. That's because the human cognitive system did not evolve to understand the truth. It understood what is useful for survival. So our cognitive system is based on survival. We understand what we grow up with. Right? Now, it is very easy to end up thinking that we understand climate change. Climate change is all manner of things to all manner of people. I've been covering this for about 3 decades now. That's 30 years. And I've heard so many stories. I travel around a fair bit across the country, and I have young people who come to me, and in a very innocent way, they ask the question, how do we prevent climate change? What can we do to stop it? And it feels very nice. I don't want to be a cynical person. I don't want to stub out their enthusiasm for doing what's right. But it is extremely difficult to explain climate change. This is quite simply the greatest, most complex problem that we have faced. And the tools that we have to understand this problem, to address it, are very shoddy. They're much shoddier than the bamboo that Navya was talking about, right? Because the human cognitive system is extremely limited, and we end up making a lot of assumptions about what we know, what we don't know. Now, I keep on asking, I have my own questionnaire that I pose to people who talk about climate change all the time. And I don't meet anybody who has an understanding of, for example, the history of climate science. It's taken human beings about 200 years to figure out the basics of how the planet's climate system works. A lot of the critical science that went into our understanding in the 1970s came from how we began to understand Venus, from from the from NASA's missions to Venus. So how I mean, Venus has had a case of what's called the runaway greenhouse effect. And there was a fear in the late 70s and early 80s that the same thing might happen on Earth. But now we know that that's very unlikely to happen on Earth. Now, these things are much bigger than who we are, right? And the primary responsibility for addressing climate change does not lie with ordinary citizens who come up and ask questions about what they can do. Or maybe somebody who's running a company and who wants to make a corporation earn profit out of what he or she sees as a business opportunity in a changing world. It's not their problem. But at the same time, we do need to make the effort to understand this. This is quite simply the biggest problem that I've had to understand. Right? I followed negotiations over climate change for many years. Nothing happens there. Right? I've been the first COP I attended was in the year 2000. That was COP 6. And I remember people talking about how this is the last chance to save the planet. Now we are verging on COP 29, and we've let at least 23 last chances to save the planet fly past our ears. So, this thing about saving the planet has always seemed like a joke to me as somebody who covers the environment. Because uh, in all these discussions, what we end up doing is we put ourselves in the center of something which is far bigger than us, right? So, the first thing that we need when we want to discuss climate change, when we want to do what we can to fix it, is to acquire some degree of humility, is to understand the scale of who we are and what we are dealing with. Right? The planet has seen much worse than us. I mean, there are at least 5 major mass extinction events in the fossil record. Then there is the great oxidation crisis of 2.2 billion years ago. Whenever you look at the geological evidence available in these things, there is ample evidence of rapid climate change. So we are not the first ones who are doing this, right? But what we are doing is going to ensure that the world as we know it will not remain as it is. So essentially, we are chopping off the branch on which we are sitting. This is not a crisis for the planet. The planet hasn't sent me any distress messages as yet. What we are doing is we are destroying the basis of what sustains us. To stop that, we need to first understand why we are doing that. We are doing that because we have the ability to put ourselves in the center of everything. So the first lesson is humility. The second is we need rigor, and that rigor doesn't come naturally to any human being. Understanding something like climate change requires a lot of hard work. It requires familiarizing yourself with the kind of information nobody wants to hear. I mean, what are the kind of things on which we spend money? We buy tickets to go watch a movie, which is a story written by somebody, enacted by other people, captured on a camera and replayed to us. Right? We spend money on novels, on television serials. That's because those things agree with our cognitive system. We tend to run with what is easy, what is convenient. And then we dress it up with this imagery of saving the world. Right? So it's consumerism with saving the world. So we need to get ourselves out of that trap. Right? First, get a healthy dose of humility. Second, develop habits of rigor. Right? I was very happy to hear what Navya was talking about. This is what, going and seeing farmers' varieties in the fields. There's one scientist called R.C. Richaria who documented 22,000 rice varieties in Chhattisgarh. Right? Now, he happens to be a family relation, and that is a part of the country I know well. The oldest fossil of rice actually comes from where Rahul is sitting right now, Nagpur. Right? Now, these are things much bigger than us. So we need first humility to understand it. Two, we need rigor to understand what is actually a very complex problem and which is not easy for us to understand. Is my time up?
Uh, it's interesting discussion. I don't want to stop you. Uh, Maybe 2 more minutes and then I will move to the next person.
Okay. So when we look at climate science, for example, you'll realize that most of the discoveries that have happened over the past 2 centuries have to do with scientists working on subjects that had nothing immediately related to this. when the basics of the Earth's climatic system began to uh, clarify for scientists, say 180 years ago, they were very happy, all the way down to, well, up to 60, 70 years ago. The scientists who figured out climate change were very happy that this is happening. Because for the longest time, there was the fear that the Earth was going to enter another phase of ice ages. And because most of these scientists were living and working in countries that are in the temperate zones and that face very harsh winters, they were delighted that the Earth is getting hotter. The fact that this is going to be damaging begins to emerge only towards the late 50s, right? The first climate models come into the 1960s. Clarity on climate change finally arrives in the 70s. In the 80s, it becomes a public subject. And what happens after that? The scientists who provided the basics for this worked inside the institutions of the US government. And the US government did their level best to stamp them out. There were scientists at the Goddard Center in New York, in the National NOAA, NASA. So, uh, you know, any kind of sensible action on climate change at a scale is really intimidating to electoral politics and the corporate sector because it cuts into the bottom line. So we need to first be clear about what we're talking about. This is not some nice fancy thing that, okay, let us all make a green future. A green future doesn't come out of a Lego set. And the earth wasn't made out of a Lego set. So just a little humility, a little rigor, some ability to invest in understanding what lies outside of our small circle of familiarity. I think now my time is definitely up.
I think that's a very important reminder which you have given. The climate action must emerge from a context. A solution, which we think today is a solution, might be the root cause of problem tomorrow. And that's, I think, would come up when we are blindly chasing some compliance or doing actions without a thought. So I think that's a good reminder and something we should be telling ourselves again and again. But this also brings me to the question, which Rahul, I would like you to discuss. What does this mean to leadership? How do executives operationalize? Do they operationalize these kind of insights, and how do they operationalize this into balance sheet and boardroom? End of the day, that's what it matters to them, right? And if I take a step back, how is climate economics showing up in boardroom decisions? Which are the three ideas which every executive should understand to stay competitive when we are talking about this kind of economy or climate change?
Thank you, Isha. And good to listen Navya's and Sopanji's point of view. Uh, See, like businesses uh, cares for opportunities, right? And when developing an opportunity, you talk about P&L, this opportunities turns to generate revenues, right? There are costs associated to make those revenues. There are risks that needs to be mitigated when you develop that idea and business and start servicing your customers. And that's what ultimately generates profitability, right? So this is how a business, any business, will work, whether it's a farmer on field, whether it's a SME, whether it's a big corporate, whether it's a services, IT company, education, even ultimately governments, right? So this is how the very basic principle of economics is, like revenues minus costs, accounting for risks gives profitability. Now, if you start looking into where climate change and climate topic starts affecting and influencing a business, right? So I think we will see that it has impact on all these three lines. The opportunities converting to revenues, translating to costs, the risks that are associated, ultimately leading to profitability. So I think the world is more and more kind of becoming aware around climate change and its impact to businesses, right? So the first, foremost, most of the businesses will care about our regulatory compliance. And because of the very new reporting mechanisms, and it varies from country to country. India has business responsibility, sustainability reporting, BRSR mandate. It applies to certain companies by turn of their share, and these companies have to report their ESG governance, right? And they would care to kind of do that. So many of the businesses in that cadre would kind of do the reporting, meet up with the basic minimal regulatory compliance, and the higher ones of them like would start looking upon opportunities to kind of work in that space, leverage climate as an opportunity, right? Many of them post regulatory compliance will now start looking into like, are their markets being disrupted, or they are able to get and harp new opportunities to service, right? Many of the exporters in India who are taking their products to Europe would start getting worried about the new cross-border adjustment mechanism, CBAM, right? And they have to start aligning their business, their value chain, their carbon footprinting for them to continue working in those markets, right? So some of those effects of climate change translating into some mechanisms enforced by some of the countries will start affecting the supply chain all around the world, right? So CBAM is one kind of an example which starts affecting from that upstream going to the downstream and creating those ripple effects, and people start taking their signal and starts working to save their markets. Many of the businesses will start seeing this as an opportunity, and they would start catering to see like what they can service this market, right? So it also creates opportunity. So that's another driver that gets discussed into the boardroom, Isha, fair often, right? So one is regulatory compliance. Second is like market growth or any kind of detractors. The third, which I believe is the most important narrative, and it matters a lot to developing countries, including India, is about economic advantage. Like what resource and energy efficiency this narrative around climate is leading us to kind of find solutions to. So we see here a lot of decarbonization technologies emerging. One of the primary being renewable energies of different forms, electric vehicles across different vehicle segments, including covering freights, right? Energy efficiency, one of the most important measures. Green hydrogen is another. So all these different technologies ultimately, when they translate into bringing that resource and energy efficiency to business, it translates into the cost efficiency and competitive advantage. I think this narrative is now growing. And I think to me, this is a bigger narrative which can drive and accelerate this energy and climate transition part that you asked more than the GHGs, right? So GHG is a push driver uh, pushed by many right institutions, mechanisms, including government. But to businesses to act, I think it will be this efficiency, cost efficiency, economics that gets translated. So I think this is another third more important drivers which is making and driving climate actions at I would say leadership levels, Isha. Lot of because the energy is becoming so important a lever in running a business across all parts. whether it being AI now, right, running those data centers, or it being really brick to mortar models like steel, cement, everywhere we are using energy. So this supply chain resilience of importing fossils, right, the disruptions by climate actions or climate events happening, I think that is also driving lot of risk mitigation measures in boardroom discussions, that how do we make a supply chain resilient and ensure that business continuity thrives, right? So that's another fourth lever I have seen takes a mind share of the leadership in this discussion. Another, I think, is the brand premium perspective, the shareholder values perspective, coming not only from the end customer appeal for being green and creating that appeal, but also employees kind of getting feeling a purpose for working with an organization which has a higher purpose, which connects to climate, which connects to community. So I have seen like that also kind of driving lot of actions. And the new green financing, so-called, in many contexts, it remains it really green or not, but that idea of climate finance and climate initiatives being able to attract low-cost funds is also attracting a lot of even small-scale startups as well into enter into this space and try to leverage this new source of financing. So I think this are some of the top points that I have seen that goes around the boardroom around climate actions, Nisha. So let me stop and pause there.
This is very interesting, the different levers which are driving the discussions. What stayed back with me from your discussion was the narrative. End of the day, it's what narrative is being sold, what narrative we are adapting, what matches our perception, and how it shapes the market. I would like to dig deeper into the narrative part with Navya. But before we go there, Navya, we have a question. We'll just take two questions from the panel. So there is one question which is for you, Navya. How do we keep ourselves updated on these new inventions and traditional knowledge of crops that is helping to mitigate climate change or business build resilience?
Right. I think that's a very important question. Why I say that is because in the last few years, what I've realized is every conversation around climate change or climate action comes from this perspective that it's all driven by modern technology, innovation, AI, and it's as though it's something new, right? And we really need to chase that. Whereas why News with Navya has a different approach on climate action is because we try and dig deep into where we come from. What does our tradition say? What does the Indian wisdom say, right? And it's very interesting to see how whenever we've tried to document anything around, say, for example, that goes back to our ancient wisdom or traditional wisdom, not a lot of information is easily available, right? Even if it is, a lot of things that we've been doing in the past, a lot of cultural practices that we've been following for decades now is because it's become a habit, because the previous generations did it and so we took it from them, but we don't really realize where they come from. So we're trying to tap into that education, and I feel understanding how solutions lie within our traditional wisdom is really important. We started this newsletter that focuses on traditional wisdom. It's called Climate Action the Indian Way. And particularly to answer this question, what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring a little bit of nostalgia and Indian traditional wisdom, like a combination of both, and educate people about climate, right? So we talk about emissions, and we use these big jargons every time we talk about climate. But a lot of times, these jargons are the reason people feel a little distant from this entire climate conversation, right? They feel like it's too technical, too difficult to understand, or too confusing. And that's like a common observation whenever I've interacted with students, whenever I've interacted even with transitioning professionals at the Green Intent, right? So people usually tend to stay away from these big terms. Which is why what we've come to realize is if we really want to talk about climate action, we need to first accept that everybody is going to contribute to it very differently in very different capacities, right? So, say, for example, there are people who are interested in clean energy. They may not be interested in anything related to waste management or mobility or something else. What we do with this newsletter is to tell you that climate action is not something additional that you have to do. It's a part of your everyday life, right? So we cover topics like how making of pickles is linked to seasons, right? And what that used to teach us about climate change, what your nani's ghar used to teach you about climate change, why the homes of Jodhpur are painted blue, right? Or something like if you're into dance, what does mudras teach you about environment or your connection with nature, right? A lot of these things we realized when recently Punjab's witnessed a lot of floods, and the northern part of India witnessed a lot of floods. We realized that this entire conversation around floods and cloudbursts and climate change was just becoming repetitive, and nobody was really reaching to any sort of conclusion. It's the same visuals that are going viral on Twitter, and we're just reposting them with no solution or conclusion at all. So we used a different approach where we talked about the fulkari dupatta, which is really famous in Punjab. And we talked about how the stitching and weaving of that dupatta is linked to the land of Punjab. The kind of symbols that you stitch on fulkari dupatta are flowers. What does that symbolize for Punjab? So while we say that the art of making fulkari has now become more of a machine art, and the beauty of weaving it is going away, so is the beauty of Punjab disappearing when it comes to floods, right? So we try and link climate solutions like that and the ancient wisdom around that, and that sort of works. The idea really is to understand how everything does not really require modern innovation or AI or tech, right? While all of that is exciting, and we've worked with so many companies that do that, but that does not necessarily mean we don't have answers to it. There's actually a very interesting movie that I watched. It's called Humans in the Loop. And I recommend everybody to go watch that movie. Why I say that is because it's that movie that really makes you think, where are we going? It's a movie that talks about traditional tribal wisdom and AI. So there's this company in Jharkhand that is, where women from Jharkhand, the tribal women of Jharkhand, work for this AI company, and they're helping them with data labeling, right? So they are preparing this machine that basically sprays chemicals on crops. So as per the company and the AI, a pest is basically any insect that is seen on a crop. Whereas for the tribal woman, it's not. It's a part of their ecosystem. It is something they've grown up with. So why would they want to kill it? Right. So the movie captures this essence and asks this very important question as to who are we really training AI for? Are we training it for the nature? Are we training it for our own convenience? Right. And who really decides what is an alien element in a particular ecosystem? So I think these questions can never be answered if we are not in touch with our traditional roots, with our ancient wisdom, with the understanding of the land where we come from. And we've spoken about so many issues, like say something like Vastu Shastra, right? In the past few years, we've realized that the idea of Vastu Shastra has revolved around a lot of myth, right? So if I don't place this particular chair in a particular direction or my bed in a particular direction, something bad is going to happen. But that's not the idea of Vastu Shastra. It's the most sustainable way of living and setting up your house. It's only related to sunlight, it's related to ventilation. But somehow we lost all of that understanding and we associated that with fear. Same as with, I recently spoke about this idea of involving community, and why that's linked to ancient wisdom is because how we celebrated something like Kumbh was, of course, about faith, religion, and all of that, but it was also about community, where people from different walks of life. So you had astronomers, you had scientists, you had farmers. All of these people reach one particular location to talk about problems. Now, those problems could range from agriculture, food, climate, so many other things. So all of these ideas are somehow rooted in our traditional wisdom, and that's what really needs to be revived in the form of stories, in the form of, really listening to all the stories that we've listened to as kids and sort of bring them out to the mainstream.
Thank you so much, Navya. Yeah, it's going back to our roots, right? All the insights, all the nuskes are really back at our home. We need to go back to our grandmother, our nannies, and find it. And just on that note, today is my grandmother's 95th birthday. So I should really call her and understand. Kuch to nuske de do.
Absolutely.
Uh, we are pressing against time, but Sopalji, we have two questions for you which build on what Navya has talked about and are interconnected. One is, what is your opinion about commercialization of the business in climate problem? How much it deviated from the real world solution? Also, whether the increased climate events are correlated to the global warming, how it impacted the communities and who is responsible for it.
Uh, okay. First question. I don't need an opinion. Uh, we can go into any level of detail answering this question, but I'll give you a summary of what I've seen. There are two institutions that are specifically uh, steeped in advertising. One is the state and the politics that goes with the state, and the second is the corporate sector. So, how does that work? It works by, so I am fat, I'm obese. It's got to do with bad eating habits, right? I see an ad that says, have this churran. It is coming from the power of ancient Ayurvedic rishis and munis, right? I'll go buy the churran. I won't look into my diet, right? That's human nature. But this is especially powerful when it comes to politics and when it comes to the corporate sector, because their image is a very important part. We heard Rahul talk. Rahul was talking about shareholder value. Now, the earth doesn't have any shareholder value. And last I checked, there is no economic value to a clean river, right? So, value is a very different thing. So, what happens is now, real world solutions, climate change is so complex that when you try to understand what is real and what is not, at the end of it, I mean, there's no end of it. But the first thing you realize is your own understanding is limited. But no, the international community has not done anything about it, has done very little about it actually. Why? There was a treaty signed in 1992, it's called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, under which all countries agreed to do whatever was required. And it was based on a principle called common but differentiated responsibility. Right? That principle was completely jettisoned in the Paris Agreement, which we hold up today as, right? So at every stage, the international community has gone down a notch in terms of doing what needs to be done. But in terms of where the solutions will come from, that's where the hope lies. We don't know. And hope lies in what we don't know. When it comes to climate change, most of what we know is scary as hell, I promise you. But there's a lot we don't know. We don't know which company will provide a solution that will work in which situation. We don't know which place will. Why is agriculture so water intensive? Right? It is water intensive because there was a great amount of emphasis on yields. And yield was the only value for agriculture. High yielding varieties. That was this. Now, life doesn't work like that. And agriculture is an experiment in biology. Agriculture doesn't come about due to the Industrial Revolution and James Watt's steam engine. Right? Agriculture is very old. There are animals other than human beings who do agriculture. So it's an experiment in biology. In biology, values are not known. Right? Evolution, that's why evolution is such a dynamic thing. Things change in response to conditions. There are facultative reproducers among plants, which will change, which follow a very set pattern of reproduction when the physical conditions are stable. But when physical conditions become unstable, which is what happens when climate change comes in, they will try different reproductive tactics and strategies to find solutions. And that's how biology works. It goes into areas that we don't know. So we don't know. I mean, there might be the number of viewers of the seminar right now, we don't know if one of those persons will come out with a remarkable uh, invention that will make it easier to do things. But just to summarize, technology and knowledge will not help us on its own. Any kind, traditional, modern, any kind. It won't help.
Rahul, we have got a question for you. It talks about what does this transition about net zero, what does it mean for a career trajectory? What are the new roles, career shift, or skill combinations that are emerging? And then another question which we have somewhere aligned is there is a university, Global University of Bhubaneswar, who are interested to go for a net zero campus. So how can they start that at least thought process, and that how do they initiate that activity?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Isha. Let me take the second question first about the campus in Bhubaneswar. I think it's a good thought, already instigated through this webinar. So congratulations, Isha, for creating that thought in your audience about how do we become a contributor, right? In whatever form that we can contribute to kind of to the solutioning part towards net zero. So I think as a campus, first they need to understand like what are the different sources, energy sources being used, consumed within the campus, which are using energy, right? That's a conventional typical step to start understanding like what is my consumption and what are the associated carbon footprints and hence emissions associated with it. And that typically in a campus setting might be coming from the electricity that they are using, right? It may go into the vehicles, which is typically scope two of the faculties and students and other guests who are visiting to the campus, right? It will deal to how they are generating and treating waste within the campus, what they are generating, right? And so on and on. Like if there are more plantations, because campus are typically wide acreage. So I think once they understand these baselines with some work, then they are able to start thinking of how they can bring down the baselines in terms of emissions and those consumptions, right? And that's where the net zero step starts happening. Then they can start mapping technologies. They themselves are the campus with engineering and managerial things. So I think in addition to the solutioning aspect, what Sopanji rightly said, that the solutions will start happening when they start collaborating, right? Like through education, through those discussions within students, faculties, forming clubs where they kind of have this thinking, working, and experimenting, which an academia is very good at. So I think that is how they can really create a livable campus with transitioning towards the net zero. And of course, start teaching and training on net zero practices. So that's the point one, answer to the second part, Isha. On the first part, where you said that what are the career opportunities that are evolving in around net zero space, typically in mid to senior level professionals. I think these professionals already have a good understanding of the domain and industry in which they are working. So I think that is their assets, that is their knowledge about the industry. And within the industry now, if they start bringing that perspective of net zero, right, across the different levers I talked about, right, in my previous conversations. Typically, from leadership, it's posed on the compliance side, cost reduction, efficiencies, supply chain resilience, customer appeal, new product development. once they know like what part of the value chain within their industry they are, which they have knowledge, they then start applying this net zero principles, mapping of technologies, understanding like how to take that integrated into their product, into their processes. So I think that transformation within the existing domain and bringing that competitive advantage through the approach and lenses of net zero, I think that's where opportunity lies. So if they want to continue being in that same industry or domain, I think they can really sharpen their skills. I like what Sopanji said, that a lot of solutionings will happen when there is empathy to understand and learn from each other, right? What we don't know. So I think that interrelatedness of a business and understanding that my business is influencing and using so much natural resources and influencing community, right, by principles of climate change and what you can be you are contributing, like there is an element of what they call social cost of carbon, right? Like whatever I'm doing today in terms of my GHG release, it is adding to the ecosystem and it is creating a event sometime in future or sometimes. So I think that is creating that relationship with the community, right? Either your direct or indirect community your business is affecting, so that that understanding and accounting for the effect that you are creating as a business and then doing that. So I think these are the measures, these are those skills which this existing professionals can really harp upon and really grow of mapping right technologies, raising right green finance, rightly taking it to the reporting angles for compliance meeting. I think this is what I see that is required in the industry. And you take any and every industry, like it's not limited to only steel or cement or banking financial industry, but it runs into pharmaceutical, IT, ITS, consulting industry, defense, education campus, as our colleague from Bhubaneswar was talking. So all these different industries, I think, have opportunity to kind of take this lenses of net zero and start striving for better efficiencies and competitive advantage. So I expect a lot of new roles as systems engineer, systems or net zero strategists, net zero transformation managers or leaders, of course within part of sustainability team, but also part of the R&D, engineering, finance, supply chain and strategy teams as well. So I believe these are the new roles that this new topic will need. And good, I think you are talking about this new course. This can really help to refine those skills and bring businesses to be more competitive. So I will stop and pause there, Ishal. I think
Thank
Sopanji
you
has.
so much, Rahul. Uh, Thank you so much,
I
Rahul.
I can quickly respond. I just add something to what Rahul said.
Sure, sure,
In answer to
Saparajit.
the question that came from Bhubaneswar, see, we are not. It's part of the human condition that we end up thinking that an idea that we had, we are the first ones to have thought of it. Right? There are many people who've actually thought through these things much before us, and two of the greatest Indians in the modern era, Rabindranath Tagore, when he set up Vishwabharati and Shanti Niketan, go and have a look at the campus. I mean, some of the greatest scholars in India have taught in those places. But go and have a look at the convocation happens in a mango grove.
Wow.
Okay, Mahatma Gandhi, when he set up his ashram in Sevagram, the rule was everything has to come from within a 9 kilometers radius. And 100 rupees, that's it. Those structures are still standing. So we are not the first ones to think of these things. There are people who've been thinking through these things for a very long time. And if you just tap into that, we will see that the solutions are all there, but they don't come in the form of advertisements that promise to save the earth. That's it. Thank you.
While I close this discussion, if I have to take a step back, the three key messages which stands out for me is from Navya, climate action creates new economics where we least expect them. So keep looking, keep looking, keep looking more deeper. From Sopanji, our tools of thought must evolve before our tools of trade can succeed. So really, we need to think deeper. We need to understand the context, why, where, how, then jump into doing things. And from Rahul, climate literacy is becoming the core business literacy. You cannot run away from it. You cannot shy away from it. So this was a very insightful discussion. Thank you so much, Navya, Sopanji, and Rahul. We had a very rich exchange, and I'm sure the audience. Thank you for bringing the cross-sector perspective. Thank you for your questions. On behalf of IM Kashipur and EV Acad, I would invite you to stay connected through our upcoming sessions.